Hi, I'm Nat.
And I'm Guy. And today we're talking climate activists learn to talk like humans, much like I need to learn to do.
Yeah, and then minimum wage, apparently, finally, they've decided that increasing it exponentially without, realizing the consequences of overpaying people and businesses deciding to go with robots instead, sanity has prevailed.
And then Lincoln Riley's murderer is convicted. If you can't remember this case, we'll go over it with you. It's an extremely interesting case within the U.S.
And then in Texas, unfortunately, a father has lost his parental rights to stop his son from being transitioned into a girl.
And then trans athletes lawsuits moves forward.
And apparently, as we've been talking about recently, Canadians keep leaving the country in droves with the highest numbers they've seen in a long time now.
And the final story was a Mexican story.
Yes, so according to one of Mexico's officials, they're saying that China will not be an issue with trade deals between the U.S. or
former climate change organizations investing in not so much talking about climate hysteria anymore. They want to talk about kind of like a hope and joy campaign, much like Kamala was doing. So you got the article up now?
Yes, I'm just looking for you because you don't. What camera? Oh, there you are.
I don't exist.
There you are.
That's not me.
Oh no, it's not you. It's both of us. What camera are you?
A little technical issues. Number 4.
Oh, you're not popping up.
There I am.
Okay, well, sorry about that.
Okay, go back to the article if we can.
Oh, there you are. Okay, so backed by millions in liberal dark money, group teaches climate activists to talk like a human, according to the Daily Wire, and to change phrases like climate change to be replaced with extreme weather because they want to, bring more people into their
sphere of influence. They are
Yes.
realizing all this panic about the world's going to end in 10 years, every 10 years, and then it never ends and things aren't much worse. It just isn't working.
Yeah, so it says the organization Potential Energy Coalition, which is a non-for-profit, says it creates and executes marketing campaigns grounded in deep analytics and human-centric stories that are proven to persuade. So they're using, obviously, a marketing campaign to get more people on their side because they've been losing traction with quite a few people. And they say one of Potential Energy's projects is the Talk Like a Human campaign, an attempt to change messaging on climate change. Which a slide shows the group encouraging people not to use words like climate change or warming and instead use extreme weather and overheating, respectively. The group also suggests people no longer use the term sacrifice when talking about the subject and instead use words like enjoy, suggesting a more positive future than the doom and gloom typically associated with climate change activism. And here we can see in this image from the Daily Wire that they're saying that in their glossary of terms, say less of this, like climate change, for example, and they should be saying more like extreme weather. Instead of sustainable, say safe and healthy. Where have we heard that before? Warming is now overheating. Emissions is carbon pollution. Renewable energy is now clean energy, and we've seen this change of phrase towards the clean, like, for example, in the beauty space, a lot of things are now clean. And it's just greenwashing. And then ban, upgrade. So we're not banning things, now we're upgrading them. Transition or transformation is progress. A lot of trans people would be happy with that phrasing. And then carbon tax is pollution fine, which is insane. Greener is cleaner, quieter,
Okay,
faster.
we kind of get the...
Well, but a lot of these is like crazy.
Yeah, a lot of it's crazy, but it's an overall transition they were really going to have to go through if they wanted to survive. 2025 is coming up, and again, the world was supposed to end in 2025. So it's another one of those markers. It never seem to work. Things don't seem to be much worse. People are really going back to oil and natural gas. I know there was a study talked about in that article where they asked a bunch of people if we can diversify into oil, natural gas, and green energy, or just go into green energy, what would you do? They said people say they prefer oil and natural gas. So everything's really changing. And also, if we remember back in the 1970s, we were gonna have an ice age. There was gonna be a global freezing, and then that changed in the 1980s to now there's a global warming and the world's gonna end. the global warming thing every 10 years, from 1980 to 1990. Well, it never happened. 1990 to 2000, it never happened. They still stuck with global warming, though. And then 2000 to 2010, the world still never ended. And there was a lot of politicians that you got funny clips that came up on them where they always said the world's going to end, and it never did. Then they asked them, and they said, well, it's still going to. Now they realize the global warming effects are actually starting to cool again, and they don't know what to say. So now they're trying to say extreme weather events. Extreme weather events also is a more long-term strategy. So they don't have to keep revising it every 10 years or defend themselves, because all they have to do is monitor extreme climate events more closely, make less extreme events seem as they are more extreme, changing the measurements and things like this. I know in Canada specifically, they changed when they were going after global warming, the way they measured global warming, they moved all the weather barometer stations from way up north in Canada, which was cold, right down to the border into all the airports. So that was an extreme change in the way they were actually doing the monitoring.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, it's crazy that now they're essentially starting to sound like 1984, like they're changing the way they're phrasing things. And they've done this with many other things, where they changed like one thing for another word. For example, safe and effective. We all remember all the campaigns that were happening around 2020, 2021, and not at all having to explain what they mean by that or show any proof. And now we're going to be seeing it as a way to, they change language, and they do this quite often, not just with the climate stuff, but it's no wonder that now they're using that same technique, and that they're being, they're funded, they're giving millions and millions of dollars. Apparently it's a sponsored project of Arabella Advisors, which is a dark money network of Windward Fund, and they rake in millions of dollars from Arabella managed groups, according to the Daily Wire, including 17.5 million in grants from the same foundation, and another 13 million, another 2 million. So these are groups that have a lot of power and a lot of influence, and they will, I believe, continue to try to make this a thing when it's not actually a thing.
Well, I just want to be extremely clear about this. They've used health and the environment to strip Western countries of their freedoms. They use this virtue signaling shield that they want the best for your health, and they want the best for the environment, and they need more and more and more power. Just like in Canada, they need this climate tax so they can tax the average citizen and make the cost of everything go up. This is why people are turning against the environment as a whole. It's not that they're turning against the environment. They're waking up to the fact that the government were using these virtual shields of health and the environment to strip their freedoms, and they don't want it anymore. So people are still pro-environment. They're just not going to let you strip their freedoms from them.
Well, it's strip their freedoms, but there's also a huge financial component to it, and a huge moving of money that we don't even see, like, for example, with wind energy or solar energy, where the actual motivations to change towards wind and solar and etc., usually it's not really just the environment, but it's also about the companies that get grants and money and funding, and who has investments in those companies. We also have to look into that and not just take it, sitting down.
Well, this is what I'm saying. Money is power, and power equals freedom. So when they're stripping freedoms, they're trying to consolidate power, and they're consolidating power through health and through the environment. And we're going to have it no more. So when Robert F. Kennedy comes out and has a new agenda when it comes to the environment, we should support him, but we should be very clear that it's not to be used to consolidate power or strip people of their freedoms.
And it's funny to me also how there's this whole talk about, especially RFK Jr., but a lot of the people on the right, and saying that they're climate deniers, climate activists, they don't care about the environment, but they're the ones that are encouraging more and more people to essentially go crunchy. They're becoming the very progressive liberal Democrats of the 90s by saying that, be sustainable, like do your own farming, don't purchase from factory farming, buy chickens, get eggs, everything organic, everything needs to be healthy, less antibiotics on our food. And now it's ridiculous also that I saw recently that there's this trend online of these crazy progressive liberals who used to be very much like that, now chugging seed oils like canola oil because they're trying to go against what RFK Jr. and all the other right-wingers are saying. So now they're doing shots of canola oil saying like, ooh, seed oils are so dangerous. and not really focusing on the actual importance of it. So to paint the right or conservatives or whatever you want to call them call us as, these climate deniers and there's no climate change. No, it's just that the solutions that are being offered by one side are completely insane and will not actually make an impact, while the other side is actually trying to do, starting with local and going into a more global.
Well, it's obvious they're losing this battle, and they're losing the battle, they are, because they're trying to change the language, change the talking points, because the old talking points just aren't working anymore. They also are telling their activists to talk local. Don't talk global anymore. Don't talk global panic. Don't talk on a global scale. Talk on a local scale about extreme weather events. Extreme weather events have always been going on. They're not going on any more now than they ever were. That's the thing.
And the way that they're reported on, that is what has changed. Like, that is the one thing that has changed.
Oh,
and
yeah.
The panic. And I mean, I don't think I can find it right now, but there's this image that was circulating last year when we had the fires in Canada and the extreme heat waves. And 10 years before that, when they would do the weather announcements and show the weather maps, for example, areas that now were painted as red and it's 32 degrees, that's scorching hot, and they were red. Before, 10 years ago, those were green areas. So I think the main problem with a lot of people is the way that they're manipulating information, they're changing information,
Statistics.
And they're not,
you can't trust statistics anymore
and
because
they're
of these
not
liberals.
doing it in a scientific way.
No, but they're going a step further, and this is what makes this so devious. When you specifically talk about the wildfires in Canada, the Canadian government were the ones actually causing those wildfires. Hundreds of wildfires across Canada were being caused by the government, and people find that hard to believe, but they're unwilling to do controlled burns, and they're unwilling to clean up the forest. They just let all this dry tinder sit there. So when one little spark goes, it goes throughout all of Canada, and then the wind picks up, and then it starts another fire and another fire because they refuse to do fire management. Mm-hmm. Fire management, you need to start controlled forest fires in order to prevent them. And the Canadian government's doing the exact opposite. It's, general forest mismanagement by the governments themselves are creating more extreme weather events like forest fires, so then they can claim, we need more money for extreme weather events. Now you can't start campfires in the forest anymore. Things like this.
And I think that is what unnerves so many people and why people are losing trust in the governments, the institutions. It's because they've started to realize what the actual motivations and what the actual things they do are. And it's not always, they're not always being as truthful as they're manipulating.
They're
people.
manipulating statistics and the management of these, whether it's the forest or the water resources or things like this. They're causing problems so they can get more control and more power for themselves and consolidate with inside government.
And money and the funding. That's also a huge component.
Then let's go to the next story, though. We spent quite a bit of time on that first one.
Speaking of money, California voters reject measure that would have raised minimum wage to nation-high $18 per hour. And this is kind of a breath of fresh air because for the longest time, they weren't doing that, but...
I think we'll have a disagreement on this one, but you can continue.
So the AP says voters in California have rejected a ballot measure that would have raised the state minimum wage to $18 per hour by 2026, the highest in the country. Opponents, including the California Chamber of Commerce, said it would have increased costs, led to higher taxes, and pushed businesses to cut jobs. And the CEO said, with the economy and costs top of mind for many voters this election, that message appears to have resonated. Proponents estimated the measure would have benefited 2 million workers, including hotel and grocery employees. Proposition 32 was a proposition that didn't pass. Is disappointing for all Californians who believe that everyone who works should earn enough to support their families. And I mean, a lot of unions were backing this as well, but it didn't pass.
Okay, so let's hear your opinion on minimum wage first.
Well, no, let's hear you.
No, because
I don't know what you think my opinion is.
I think you think this is a good thing, and
that it didn't pass.
Yeah.
I mean, in general, yes, because we've seen a lot of workers already fired and losing jobs at a higher record once the minimum wage measures actually pass. Once minimum wage is raised, well, it gets more expensive for the businesses, and it escalates downward and they end up getting fired. That's why we've seen a lot of firings recently in the food service industry, in the coffee shop industry, and in the manufacturing industries as well, because they've been able to now replace workers with robots or screens and lower that burden that used to be increased when you increase minimum wage and make the actual owners of the businesses pay out more. You can't hire as many people, and therefore they end up getting fired anyways.
Yeah, and I think this is the traditional conservative view. And, I agree with a lot of these talking points, but you really have to look at this as a whole. If you're going to fix these situations, this really integrates with immigration as well. But you can't just say no minimum wage. Countries like Mexico and other...
I'm not saying no minimum wage. I'm saying don't exponentially keep rising it until people can't pay their workers and end up firing them.
Third world, we're going to disagree on this. Third world countries need a minimum wage and they need a good living wage so the country can make it up to a middle class standard. First world countries don't necessarily, I don't think they need a minimum wage at all. What I think they do need is they need to have less immigration. With less immigration, you have a much higher demand for workers. So the workers that are in the country don't need to be paid a minimum wage because every single worker is going to get more than a fair wage just to have a worker. They're either going to have robots or they're going to have to pay the workers appropriately. So you're not going to ever just be able to go off robots alone. No. So if you were able to have a moratorium on immigration, for instance, in high-end Western countries like Canada or the United States, this would cause a massive rise in wages, and not just wages, but the benefits, the health benefits, housing benefits, and things like this. People are willing to provide their workers. Workers become a lot more valuable, and people want lifetime workers like what the United States used to have, rather than now a company will fire you tomorrow without a thought, and people are having to have 3 and 4 jobs because there's too much competition for work. So I think the solution in more modernized Western countries is not a minimum wage, but you solve that through immigration. And in second and third world countries, I think you do need a high minimum wage.
Yes, but what kind of country are we talking about here? Where is California located?
In the United States.
What is the United States? Is it developing or has it developed?
It's developed.
Do they have enough people if they stopped a moratorium completely on all immigration?
I said they don't need a minimum wage.
So
I'm saying they don't need a minimum wage, but they're going to have to focus on immigration. They have to solve that first.
Yes.
So they do need a minimum wage now because there's over competition for the jobs.
But you've also argued that immigration is a necessary thing for the U.S.
A necessary or unnecessary thing?
Necessary. You said that yesterday.
Yeah, today, right now, I'm saying the U.S. should stop immigration so they can increase the wages of the workers that are there.
Okay, but then what would happen with
you have what's called legal immigration, and then there's illegal immigration. These are two different ideas.
Okay, because you just said stop immigration in general.
Well, I'm mainly talking about illegal immigration and the illegal competition for low-wage workers, which dramatically hurts the U.S. worker itself.
But do you think the U.S. workers would want to do those minimum wage jobs?
They wouldn't. There would be no, if there was no illegal immigrants, there would be no. There would probably be no need for minimum wage. Those minimum wage jobs would pay much higher than minimum wage.
But I still think that a lot of those jobs nowadays, I mean, in the past, sure, but nowadays, those jobs wouldn't really go to Americans. They would go to robots. Like in agriculture, in fast food places.
A lot of agriculture, just like mining, can't be done by robots. I used to work in mining.
But they can unload a lot of the burden onto robots.
They can, and they should. And that if America wants to bring manufacturing back to the States, what they're going to have to do, and especially if they don't want to put their citizens second, is rely on a lot of mass manufacturing from robots, but have that complemented by workers. Now, if you don't have a lot of illegal immigration coming into the country, robots and workers work very well together, and the workers can get high wages, and you have very low unemployment when it comes to the population. So I think robots and citizens can work very well together. I don't think you should try to avoid the problem by letting other countries use robots and have an advantage over you. You need to control the size of your population, basically.
Sure. But I mean, my general point is not that there shouldn't be a minimum wage. It's just that the exponential increasing of it without also managing housing costs or anything else doesn't really benefit anybody. Because the real reason why they're having to increase minimum wage and why people are not being able to afford anything doesn't only come down to the fact of how much they're getting paid. It's also factors of housing and production costs.
Oh yeah, well, let's say you're
et
making
cetera.
a $10 minimum wage in the United States, which I think lots of the United States is $8 to $10. Not all the United States, but some. So if you're looking at a $10 minimum wage, you can't survive on that with the amount of inflation that's come. So what do you suggest
That's what
for
I'm
work?
saying.
So what do you?
The solution is not just to increase minimum wage.
Yeah, but
and
you,
not
but,
to increase it almost
but you need
yearly
a
or
you
monthly.
need a, you need a temp, you're going to need a
6
temporary you're going to need a temporary solution for these workers that are going to be homeless otherwise.
Yes, but if inflation continues to rise, then it's just a nonstop, wheel.
What I'm saying is you have to address the inflation issues and all the other issues you're talking about, but you're going to have to have a stopgap, and that stopgap is going to be a minimum wage, and you're going to give a good high livable minimum wage until the time you can control the amount of illegal workers coming into the country. So then your natural wage will exceed the minimum wage.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that the stopgap between them doing the one thing and them doing the other things that they need to do is still there, and they're not very keen on fixing all the other issues.
Well,
So it's like a Band-Aid. What I'm saying is it's just a Band-Aid.
Well, if they don't want to fix the other issues, then they have to give a high minimum wage.
Exactly, but then it continues to increase, and businesses continue to not be able to keep up with it, especially, mom and pop, one sole business owner kind of businesses. Walmart can, buy more robot cashiers and just do that, and Starbucks can just use the little screen, same as McDonald's, but mom and pop shops end up not being able to afford
So you're
such big wage hikes, and that's, I think,
but
why the measure didn't pass.
But they can, especially if you think about the way in which you're going to structure. If your goal is to switch to manufacturing with robotics and decrease the population of the United States so you get a higher livable wage with the people that are there, that's no problem, because then you can have special tax brackets for mom and pop shops and things like that, where, they give a high minimum wage required by the government, but then they get massive money back at the end of the year with the funding. If you have like 10 or less employees, you're going to have regulations that are stopgaps until you're able to create a society without a minimum wage, because wages are just going to naturally be higher than what is minimally required.
Sure. I don't think we're going to agree or get to any significant points on this issue. So let's move on to a sad story. Which
You know more about this one than I do, so.
we have kind of covered. I've covered at least last year when it was happening. But the Daily Wire says, "Goodbye, boys. Texas dad says California judge gave ex-wife authority to snip the body parts off of his son. I did my best to stop the transgender taking off of body parts of my son." And it says, on Tuesday, a Texas father who has spent years fighting his ex-wife's attempt to trans their son said a California judge had sealed the boy's fate, allowing the mother to go forward with gender-affirming care, huge air quotes there, that would enable her the authority to snip body parts off of his son. This is Jeff Younger. We have talked about him. He has been fighting for years now. Me being somewhat a little bit connected with Billboard Quiz, we were both following this story. Last year, I also spoke about the fight, not just of him, but also a father in British Columbia that was going through the same thing. And there's another guy that also, but he succeeded with stopping his ex-partner, but that was only because his ex-partner that was trying to transition his child was completely insane. That was the only reason why he was allowed to, stop the transing of his kid. Jeff Younger says, "I lost parental rights to my sons. Goodbye, boys. Perhaps we will meet when you're adults. California Judge Juhas gave my ex-wife authority to, etc." He posted on X. And he also says that the visits will be supervised, and he does not want to do that. He will continue to communicate through gifts and letters, but he does not want to be under the thumb of the government or supervised when he does these visits. And it's just... So apparently he was also supported by Miriam Grossman. She's a physician, if you haven't seen her. She was on What is a Woman by Matt Walsh, and she's also appeared in several other podcasts and shows. She's very smart, and she talks about what transitioning children actually does and how it is a medical scandal. And I would say the gravest medical scandal of our times. But yes, that's what's happened.
I don't have a camera, so do you want me to switch it, or
Hold on.
I'm waiting for you to do the switcherboard? Okay.
So, you still don't have a camera.
You can continue.
Okay, so younger, this whole story has been happening for about, since 2018, but the media kind of heard about it around 2020, 2021, when he was actually moving through the courts. It's crazy that this is happening in Texas because usually, these kinds of things happen in the crazy blue states, and now Texas has gone even redder. So it's crazy that this judge has gotten the power to completely give his wife what she wants to do, which his wife is a pediatrician, which is also crazy.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff came down before the Trump administration's taken office. The hammer's going to be laid down.
Well, no, it started when Trump was in office, 2018.
Yeah, but he didn't have mandate. But he didn't have, number one, a mandate or the power through the American people. He was handicapped completely. That wasn't a real administration. This time he's coming in there guns a-blazing. You already see everything, judges transitioning into having different outcomes on the court cases that were coming up that you were expecting were going to go one way. They're now going the completely opposite, whether that be the Andrew Tate case internationally or whether that be Judge Merchan with the Trump case. This case, it just happened to come right as Trump came in. If you would have gave this a month or two, I don't think this judge would have made this judgment, because now he's going to be on the chopping block, I think, and the Trump administration is going to be really looking at him.
Well, the problem, what actually happened was that Newsom, the Democratic governor of California, decided to make California a sanctuary state. So the wife, who's called Anne Gorgolas, the pediatrician crazy lady, decided to move to California, which is a sanctuary state where the people cannot be chased or convicted if they do decide to transition either themselves or their children, which I don't think anybody should be convicted for if you're an adult, but if it's for children, he did that so that the people in the states that would allow judges and courts to go after either pediatricians or parents themselves who decide to transition their children, so they could go seek refuge in California.
Yeah, but all this sanctuary state bullcrap is coming to an end. I mean, this had worked in the past. Trump's already talking about with immigration how he's going to treat these sanctuary states. It's not going to fly. And so I'm sure he's not going to want to give all these special privileges to these sanctuary states, which are completely illegal on a federal level.
Yes, but I don't know if this decision could now be backtracked. I think for now it's because, they're going right ahead now.
Yeah, they're going to go ahead with it. It's too late for this gentleman, and it's extremely sad. But going forward, I'm really hoping, and they've said they are. The Trump administration said they're going after cases like this. Mm-hmm. So it's just sad what happened to him overall, and that fathers' rights completely have been taken away in all Western countries.
And also, kind of the fight that he went through and how other fathers were, allowed to continue fighting for their sons, and he was completely derailed.
Well, yeah, very often,
because it's been a long fight.
Very often children are better left off with their fathers if you have to pick up between the mother and the father, which is never the best situation. Mm-hmm. But if you have to pick one of the parents, statistically, the children come out much better adjusted and ready for the world when raised by the father. This is just a statistical truth.
Our kids would do better with me.
That's because you're authoritarian and you think so. Our dog doesn't.
But I do kind of agree, because we do see a lot more the consequences of having fatherless homes rather than motherless homes. But that's also because that just doesn't happen that often. And there is a huge skew towards mothers when discussing divorce court mostly divorce court. So I think that's
divorce court's completely.
Not in all states, though. In the United States, it doesn't happen in all states, but
it's skewed in women's favors internationally in all Western countries. Yes. And never mind, I won't bring that issue up. Okay, let's go back to the story that you missed.
Well, now there is an uplifting thing that has to do with transgenderism, but
no, the story that you missed.
What story did I miss?
The Lincoln Riley story.
Oh, well, because these are trans. stories, so
okay.
I'm going to do them together because one is kind of a downer that has to do with the transgender community, and one is a really good thing that's happening. So a lawsuit challenging a Connecticut high school policy on transgender athletes can move forward, the judge said. And, okay, hold on.
Go back to the thing now.
Hold on.
So now if you go into it, I should be on there.
There you are.
Perfect.
So there's so a federal judge has declined to dismiss a lawsuit brought on by four former high school students that were, I'll just read it like this. Okay, let me explain it. So there was a situation, I'm sure you've seen the picture of these athletes. This is a transgender athlete, so a biological male that was competing against biological females and essentially stripping them of their hard-earned titles in Connecticut. And what happened was that three students put forward a lawsuit. This was a while ago. Don't remember if it was like 2020 or at least a few years ago. Sorry. At least a few years ago. It was four female high school athletes against the school's policy to allow these biological males to compete in their sports.
So
and
what's the basic gist of the story?
that's what I'm saying.
I'm not understanding though. Just give it to me quickly.
Okay, so four high school athletes, females,
Yeah.
had put forth a lawsuit a while ago, like
Against
2
the
or 3
school.
years ago, against the school and the policy that they had, and the athletes, I believe, as well. They were kind of lumped in there.
Okay, you're losing track. Give it to me quickly.
A lawsuit that had been dismissed will not be allowed to be dismissed by a new
What's the
judge.
lawsuit about?
About biological males competing against females in Connecticut.
And that it's legal or it's illegal?
Well, it's just that the lawsuit has been allowed. They've had so many issues trying to bring this lawsuit forward. The young athletes have. And now finally someone has listened to them
So
and
who are
not
these-
allowed them to dismiss it just outright.
So these athletes are trans.
Not for female ones, no.
Okay.
They had to compete against trans athletes and they were
Okay,
suing
so
the school.
basically what you're saying is the state or the school is promoting the trans athletes to
school.
compete with the women, and the women have brought a lawsuit against the school
Yes,
district.
the school was allowing it, and now for the longest time, the district and the school were allowed to kind of deny their lawsuit and move it aside. Now finally, years later, it has been allowed to
And now
move
they-
forward, and they might actually get something out of it.
Well,
but
they
they've been
will,
fighting
because-
for,
They're in a favorable
Years.
environment with the Trump administration now.
yeah. So, I mean, that's why it's good.
yeah.
So it's a positive.
Well, it's a good thing it took this
thing
long
that's happening.
to get in.
Yeah,
because
now it is. But for the longest time, it was frustrating that it was one of the few lawsuits and things that were happening to highlight the issue that it is having biological males compete against females in sports, especially when they're not adults yet, when it's teenagers or younger. And now finally, it's one of the few things that has moved forward and sanity may prevail. And it may highlight and encourage others, especially female athletes, to do something about the injustices that are happening within their sports. That's
And what's our next story? Lincoln Riley. This was your big story.
Laken Riley, not Lincoln. You're doing the same mistake Biden did. Which, by the way, today's Joe Biden's birthday, so
Oh, happy birthday, Mr. Biden.
You're
Oh, happy
still
birthday,
alive.
Mr. President.
Somehow.
Well, you still are. They're talking about impeachment of him now as well. They just put forward the bill, or they're looking to put it forward. A Texas senator is.
it won't go anywhere.
Well, they might want Kamala in there. So remember, they were asking him to step down so Kamala could be the
Yes.
first female and
Yes.
black and lesbian. Well, maybe not
She's not a
lesbian.
lesbian. She's just married to a women abuser, but whatever. That's a different story we've also already covered. But mine convicted of ending the life of Laken Riley, sentenced to life in prison without parole. This was, and the AP obviously buries the lead, but this was not just a Venezuelan man, but an illegal migrant who was convicted of killing Georgia nursing student Laken Riley and has been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was charged on all 10 counts. And Jose Ibarra, which is the name of this guy, was charged with murder and other crimes in Riley's February death, and the guilty verdict was reached basically by a judge, and everybody's glad that justice has been served. So here's all he did: 1 count of malice murder, 3 counts of felony murder, 1 count of kidnapping with bodily injury, aggravated assault with intent to R-word or grape, aggravated battery, obstructing an emergency call, evidence tampering, and being a peeping Tom. So this was a huge case about, I mean, it was even brought up during the debates. It's been talked about since it happened because of it brings to light what's happening with a lot of the non-checking of migrants and just allowing everybody to come through the door. They're not really knowing who is coming through the door.
Especially with Venezuelan migrants, because a lot of Venezuelan prisons where people were just absolutely released and told to leave the country. Mm-hmm. And what a lot of them did was come up through the NGOs, through Mexico, through Central America, and into the States, and they were helped by these NGO organizations. Yeah. And now you're seeing the results of that.
And also during the trial, few days ago, it came out that this guy, Jose Ibarra, was one of the people that once they arrived in the United States, and they were, I believe, he was staying in a hotel somewhere, and he requested asylum or auxiliary support for himself. So he was able to get a flight to where he did the ending of the life in Atlanta, because he was originally not in Atlanta, and this was done through taxpayer dollars.
Absolute tragedy.
But it's good that Laken Riley got justice, and it's also, if you remember, this was the moment when
Marjorie Taylor Greene stood up in Congress.
Exactly. When Joe Biden was giving the State of the Union address, Marjorie Taylor Greene stood up and yelled, "Say her name." He said the name wrong. He said Lincoln Riley, which is what was even more of a disrespect. And then he continued to pander to the ridiculous progressiveness, whatever he was talking about. But yes, it's great that she and her family got justice, but it shouldn't have had to happen. And she was a nursing student that was just running. And the fact that the left and the Democrats didn't want to acknowledge even that there is an increase in crime, that there is an issue with not checking who's coming through the door. This just highlighted it even more, and the people have spoken, because immigration was one of the biggest issues during the election.
Yeah, I think it's very obvious Trump's kind of politics, and it's called common sense politics. We're no longer going off of these manipulated statistics that liberals want to give out that, we're not bringing in more illegal immigrants and more crimes not happening and the economy's great. People just have a sense of what's going on. They have common sense, and that's what Trump speaks to. He speaks to people's common sense, and it's very prevalent that the government's not only manipulating statistics, but manipulating a lot of other things. We talked about this earlier when it came to the forest fires in Canada and things.
And speaking of Canada, thank you for bringing that up. Well, we continue to speak about this because I guess we were one of the ones that did this, but Canadians flee the country in 4th highest volume in 73 years. And there's essentially a brain drain happening, but now it's even more clear given the statistics. So this is from a while ago, but Canada may have record population growth, but what happens if immigrants see them as exodus of citizens? Statistics Canada, or StatCan, shows that, for example, in 2023, immigration, or reverse migration, so people going back, was at an unusually high level, and they fled the country in volumes that are 3 times higher than in the past century. So in the past 73 years, the quarter 3 of 2023 saw a 3% rise, up to 32,026 people leaving, and it has just continued to grow. And I mean, it's not hard to see why. We've spoken about it a bunch of times now, but they're just allowing, and now that Trudeau has said that he wants to pause immigration, but not really pause it.
Oh, no, that story was not misreported, but there was a lot of things going on with that. Trudeau's actually looking to increase immigrant populations by 150%. He's saying he was going to decrease it.
Yeah, but it wasn't true.
But it's not true. What he's saying is he's going to decrease future estimates of how many immigrants he's going to allow in, but he still wants to keep increasing the amount of immigrants coming in. And you're already seeing immigrants begin to flee for Canada once Trump has come in office. They're going to the border and claiming refugee status already. So there's an estimate of anywhere between 15 and 25 million illegal immigrants in the United States. If Canada just gets a fraction of that, because Canada only has 40 million person population in total, it's going to be a major hit to their infrastructure, the education system, the healthcare system. All these things aren't going to be able to support it.
All of those are already collapsing and don't even work properly for the people that are already there. And
Mexico is going to have a rude awakening if a lot of these people get deported into Mexico. Mm-hmm. So if Trump manages to deport 5 million people, or 10 million people into Mexico, the Mexican population is now going to understand what the U.S. Was going through when it came to crime and other things.
Yeah, and I mean, there has been a lot of increases in crime or gang crime, for example, that are not local to Mexico in the past 5 to 10 years also, when the immigration started to explode towards the U.S. after Biden decided to open the floodgates.
Well, it's important that Mexico, I think that Trump does empty a lot of these illegal immigrants into Mexico, so Mexico can feel how it is to have such an influx of permanent migrants that aren't going to leave, because they're the ones that took the funding from the NGOs and set up this infrastructure from everybody coming from Central and South America to come through the country straight to the U.S. border and go in. So if they do have a big influx of immigrants come into Mexico, they're going to secure the Mexican southern border, which is a lot smaller than the United States border. The U.S. is also willing to fund the securing of the southern Mexican border. They always have been. The Mexican government has just been unwilling to do it. So if you put a little fire under the Mexican government's ass, maybe they will end up securing the southern border.
But I mean, I think one of the most important issues that doesn't really get talked about when they're talking about the deportation of millions of illegal immigrants is that a lot of them are not even from Central and South America. A lot of them are Chinese immigrants. A lot of them have been and are known to be on terrorist watch lists.
Russian, Chinese, and Indian immigrants are a major contributing factor now.
But also from the Middle East, they are and have been known to either be already criminals in their countries or being on terrorist watch lists, and now they're just lost somewhere in the States. So when people feel really bad about saying, no, don't deport all of those people, the first people that they want to deport are the ones that have already been convicted of crimes in the United States, other than, being there illegally, which was already a crime.
This was about Canada.
Yes. But I just wanted to make that point clear, that when, at least initially, they're talking about deportations, they're talking about deporting criminals that are already criminals in the States, aside from the fact that they've illegally entered, which is in itself a crime. And it's not just Central and South Americans, and it's not just, poor people, poor Mexicans, poor Latin Americans. It's people from really far away, and who knows how they got there, who financed it, and why they were really in the U.S. to begin with.
Let's bring it back to Canada.
Yes.
And the reason the Canadian immigration issue is far different than the American, because it's extremely hard to get in the country. You can't just cross a land border traditionally. Yeah. Now with immigrants fleeing from the United States, possibly to Canada, it's going to be the first time they've really had a land border influx. For the most part, immigration is controlled by the government, and they used to have one of the best immigration systems. Mm-hmm. The problem is Trudeau wanted to cash in on this, and he let such an influx and so many millions of immigrants come in all at once. There's not enough housing and resources for anybody in the country now.
Yeah.
So also, Canada is very lucky because they get to handpick who they want. So they handpick people that are very intelligent, doctors, lawyers. If they need farmers, they'll bring farmers in. But you have highly intelligent college degree applicants coming into Canada. So now what you're seeing is Canada statistically looked at the statistics for the first time in years and realized they're having a brain drain. They're not able to keep these people within the country. As soon as they get citizenship, they immediately want to go to the United States because there's better opportunities to start their own businesses and things like that. It's a much less socialist country.
And it's also because, and this is one thing that Pierre Poilievre at least was talking about last year, a lot of the doctors and nurses and people that are very smart that go and immigrate to Canada, they have to jump through hoops and be revalidating their certificates for years in Canada before they can even practice or do anything. So a lot of them end up being Uber drivers or delivery drivers, and that's not the vision of Canada that they had. And it is one thing that Pierre Poilievre kind of continued to speak about, at least last year, about the certification process and the fact that even if Canada needs more doctors and doctors are coming to Canada, they're not able to be doctors because it takes so long to even get them to be certified, recertified.
What they need is a challenge to the certification exam. So, which is going to be a big challenge for an immigrant because they're going to have to understand the language extremely well in order to pass a medical exam, a written medical exam to become a doctor, but they should have the option to challenge it.
And I mean, they should also, if they're going to be practicing medicine, probably should be able to have that level of English or French to do
for
it.
sure.
So I don't think it's like but that's so mean, they don't really know English. Well, then maybe they shouldn't be a doctor in an English and French speaking place.
Well, now, I was reading a story today, and it was very interesting. Because Canada is not able to hold on to the immigrants they're getting, and they need immigrants to artificially boost their GDP, what they're going to do is they're building new housing for new immigrants in Ottawa.
Oh, yeah,
so they're giving free housing to immigrants, but what about the citizens that are homeless and things like this? This is going to cause a natural rift between the people that are already citizens and the people that are coming to the country. The Canadian government's talking about giving mass benefits to all new immigrants in order to try to wine them and dine them so they stay within the country. Because what's happening, they're coming, then they're leaving for the States, and they're not becoming permanent taxpayers, which is really hurting.
Which is what Canada needs when they say they need more labor force and more workers. They need somebody to keep paying their socialist utopia, dystopian nightmare that they're living in right now. So that's what they actually mean. But speaking of somebody that has paid Canada a lot and continues to be an issue for all of us in the three countries, this is translated from a Mexican article that's in Spanish, but the U.S. Mexican official says the U.S. receives 160 times more Chinese investment than Mexico, according to Marcelo Ebrard. He's the Secretary of the Economy. I won't comment on my opinion of him, but there's been a lot of talk about now that Trump wants to, impose tariffs on everybody. What's going to happen with its trade partners and with their own internal economies. So the United States, he said, receives 160 times more foreign direct investment from China than Mexico, as he said at a conference after a series of indications from the US and Canadian officials that Mexico has invited China to invest and has become its backdoor to send its products to those nations, so Canada and the US, without tariffs. And then Ebrard argued that between 2016 and 2023, according to the information released, China has invested about $395 billion in North America, of which $269 billion, or 68%, were destined to the U.S., $124 billion, $639 million, 31%. A lot of others within the U.S., newly minted U.S. incoming government, have also spoken about wanting to kind of distance themselves from Mexico because Mexico has essentially allowed China to walk in through the front door.
Well, no, I think the type of relationship Mexico has built with China is the issue. So I believe that if Mexico wants true sovereignty, they need to have the U.S. as a trade partner and China as a trade partner, and potentially Russia in the EU. They need to play them off each other to get the best deals they can. But Mexico has put themselves in a position where people are coming to Mexico, specifically Chinese manufacturing companies are coming to Mexico because they want to get around this tariff and import these products into the United States. Mexico needed to build trade relations with China exclusively within Mexico, not as it's related to the United States. Almost all the investment coming into Mexico is geared towards the United States so they can get around different kinds of tariffs and embargoes put on China. Mexico needs to foster these relations with China, between China and Mexico, without the U.S. and not products that are going to be funneled or built in Mexico and then shipped to the U.S.
But then wouldn't they be essentially harming their relationship with their biggest trade partner and their most important
No,
border?
the reason the U.S. is so upset with Mexico is because they know China's opening these factories in Mexico in order to get around the tariffs, which that's exactly what they're able to do. I don't think the United States, as much as people think the United States doesn't want Mexico trading with China, I don't think they mind as long as it's trade and negotiations that have to do with things that are going to stay within Mexico and don't actually affect the United States. But it's like they're trying to sanction China, and the sanctions are completely ran around because of Mexico. So Mexico has to have a policy where you can't build manufacturing plants close to the border and then ship things into the United States. They have to realize the biggest global superpower is the United States, and that is Mexico's biggest trading partner. Mm-hmm. So they have to keep them happy. But if they're continuously building manufacturing plants on the border and going around the U.S.'s plans, the U.S. is going to be pissed. And Trump's coming into office; he's going to make some hard deals now. So but I do think China needs to Mexico needs to have good relations with China.
I mean, I think coming from Canada, it's kind of rich that they're now saying that, oh, we're going to do a bilateral agreement without Mexico with the U.S., while Canada is essentially China 2.0, including adopting a lot of their crazy communistic ideas as well.
Canada can say whatever they want.
And they have Chinese spies within the government
Canada's
as well.
is in the worst position of the two countries between Canada and Mexico to try to negotiate something. They have natural resources. The issue is the United States has an abundance of natural resources, so they're not so much in need of those Canadian industries. And if you don't know about Canada, it's the natural resource industries that keep Canada afloat, and that's all they have to offer to the world. America is going to look for cheap manufacturing. First, they're going to want to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., but there's going to be an overflow of less technical products, less intellectual property products as well that they're gonna need built cheaply. Canada can't provide that because minimum wage is so high, and we just talked about minimum wage. The minimum wage in Mexico and the factories that already exist here do exist, so Trump can negotiate trade deals without tariffs on specific products. So manufacturing coming back to the United States could actually benefit Mexico if they're willing to take the overflow of manufacturing. But it's not going to be for Chinese products. That's the thing.
But I mean, for example, I do agree with you, even though I don't want to, that it is like Mexico right now is positioned in a pretty good spot to play everybody off of each other. It has to be very careful when it does that because it could lose everything if they play like a wrong misstep. But I think they've kind of been able to strengthen their own side as well in like before this new incoming government.
Well, and I will say this, like with the Trump administration coming in, the Morena government's economic policies are looking a lot better. Now, I'm not talking about their cultural policies at all. I'm still really against them. But AMLO, when he was in power, he was the president of the Morena party. He was preparing.
Mexico.
He was preparing for a Trump presidency, and he called it almost exactly now that I'm looking at it, because he didn't invest heavily in manufacturing. People were like, why aren't you doing this? This is the future of Mexico. But now you see Trump's coming in with these hard tariffs. So the fact that they didn't make these huge investments in the manufacturing actually was perfectly played by AMLO at the time, now that Trump's in office. Also, the fact that they built these two big shipping yards on the west and east coast of Mexico with a train line connecting them, this is going to allow them to trade with China and have access to the Pacific and the the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico, and really go around the United States when it goes to trade with China and things and other.
But the
people
question
like
is, does Mexico really want to hinder its position within the USMCA, which is a trade agreement that followed NAFTA?
Well, yeah, they're gonna have to have sovereignty. They're not
Because
gonna,
the U.S. is a lot more important and closer to Mexico than China is.
yeah, but if you realize where they built these ports, it was in central and south Mexico. It wasn't in northern Mexico. Northern Mexico, if you're building ports in
Because
northern
it's hard to build a
Mexico,
port
this
there.
is a huge threat to the states. But because they're in central and southern Mexico, it's a lot less of a threat. They're more looking.
But they're clearly looking at the relationship between China and Mexico as being a threat in and of itself, and allowing, like what Mexico has done by allowing China to come in
Yeah,
all the way
and
in.
this is exactly what I said. You have to compartmentalize your trade agreements when it comes to people that are in an economic war like China and the United States.
Yeah, and
So
you have to
I
play
think
them
the
off
Uni-
each other.
I think
Yes.
the United States is fine with Mexico trading with China as long as it doesn't
Bring it
involve
into the States.
bringing it into the States.
Yeah.
Or stealing other IPs and things like that, exporting IPs to China. There's different ways so they're trying to play both sides of the coin. So far, they're set up very well because they didn't build a huge manufacturing base in the north of the United States. They built a bit, but that was not done by the federal Mexican government, which I think America now in the Trump administration is going to respect.
And we've yet to see what will happen with that as well. But a lot of different stories today. They're kind of U.S. heavy. But
Yeah, I was a little bit low energy today, so.
well, we started later as well because we had a lot of other that we have a lot of things we have to figure out still. I will have another live in Spanish tomorrow, and
And when's your new expose coming up?
well, thanks to your computer breaking down and a bunch of other things happening, maybe later tonight, but probably tomorrow, and then.
And that's in English or
in
Spanish?
Spanish, and then I still owe people a feminism one in English and a second part of the feminism series in Spanish. So I got a lot of work to do, but glad to do it and glad to do it where we are.
Adios.
Have a lovely rest of your night. Bye.